All right, it's 1 o'clock. Thursday, what is it, 17th? 17th of August.
17th.
I am Tom from Wyant Technologies. With me is Mike Hauser, the National Sales Manager from Inskyber. Today we are going to talk about cyber liability insurance and hopefully answer your questions. I know I have questions. So, Mike, you want to talk about yourself?
I'll do my best to keep you guys awake during this event. So, my name is Mike Hauser, like Tom said, and I'm the National Sales Manager for Inskyber. We are a insurance broker located about an hour north of Philadelphia, and we specialize in professional E&O for MSPs and cyber liability insurance. So, I just kind of want to get into some of the details of why you would need cyber insurance and what types of parts of the policies may apply to you guys. So obviously, cyber insurance is there to protect you guys from anyone who has to deal with, important data on a daily basis, which pretty much is everyone in the world today. So it's kind of broken. Cyber liability is kind of broken into two different parts. There's first party cyber coverage, which that's designed to protect, your guys' company specifically. So it's cost to restore data that be damaged, or if you had a ransomware event and someone hacked in, or if there was a what we refer to as a social engineering event or phishing scam that involved the funds transfer fraud. These are the areas that fall under the first party coverage of a cyber policy. And then there's third party, so that kind of deals with the fallout, from an attack that would affect your, customers or your employees or maybe your clients. And that would cover things such as fines or defense costs or notification costs, or sometimes even monitoring, data going forward, that may have been affected by the actual breach itself. So the cost of cyber insurance is kind of figured using a bunch of different things. So the type of business that you're involved in, the size of the actual company, the claims history, if you had any claims histories in the past, and then obviously nowadays the types of controls that you're using, and that's typically obviously where the MSP comes into effect as far as what kind of controls end users are using, to protect themselves from a cyber event. So, with that being said, I think you may have a few questions for me, Tom. So, I'm very I've been doing this for about 3 years, and I like to always kind of tell a little bit of a funny story. When I first changed careers from construction to the insurance industry, I was explaining it to my then 10-year-old daughter at the time. And I said, I'm going to go sell insurance and cyber insurance in particular. And she quickly wrote down on a 3x5 card that insurance, she said, something boring that helps if something bad happens. And I thought to myself, I could not have written it any more perfectly than that. So
that's great.
I was raised in a household where my parents would consistently complain about having to have insurance and not being able to use it. And I get it. It's an additional cost, but it is obviously a layer of protection. We kind of compute it to like the backstop of after you put all your controls in place. It's the policy itself is the backstop for your protection. So, thanks for having me today, Tom, and thanks for everyone involved and out there listening. So I think you may have had a few things you want to bounce off me.
I do. So thanks for being here. And I agree with you on the insurance. It's like, what am I paying this for until something happens?
Exactly.
So I've had car insurance for years. Haven't had a problem until last summer. I hit a deer. So they fixed it and it was cheap. So I'm not going to complain because it would have cost a lot more money. Haven't had any breach. My desk is wood. Haven't had any breaches. Had a close one last week, but the policies were in place to stop the funds. So, there's stuff you got to do. A lot of this issue is human. So I'm going to share this cyber liability form, and I borrowed this from a client. It is blank, but I want to go over some of the stuff I've seen in here and ask questions about it. You mentioned, previous cyber incidents, if there's any problems. So far, I don't have anybody that's had that issue. What I think
knock on wood again.
What's that?
I said I'll knock on wood again.
Yeah, I've got my desk is actual wood. It's not press board. I'm very, very lucky to have a wooden desk to knock on. So you've got the basic questions. If you're using a managed service provider, number of servers, number of desktops, annual IT budget. What's the percentage of your IT budget spent on security, which is always fun to go over because you talk to people and they find out they're not spending much, if anything, on it. But we get down here, where are you? So data storage management, if you're storing PII or PHI, they're going to want to know that, which is, that's standard.
Right.
Where are we? Down to here, endpoint security. So I want to ask you about this. I was working with a client a year and a half ago where they did a renewal and the insurance company denied them coverage because they were using a specific antivirus. Is there something you look for when you're going through the applications? Is there a specific product you look for or a specific level of product you look for EDR?
Carriers are starting to look more closely on what type, what product you're using. And then in particular, when it comes to endpoint, they are also very interested in what percentage of the endpoints that you have are, actually have it in place. But like I said, they are definitely getting more interested in whose product you're actually using. And I have had that instance where I was unable to get a quote based upon a certain type of software they were using, specifically to them. So
are they looking for something managed? Are they looking for something backed by a SOC, or is it just a specific, they're looking for something like a SentinelOne instead of a web root?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get too terribly technical, but it's so, I mean, the market is forever obviously changing, and it's changing relatively quickly. So, what, I don't know, like specifically what types of controls that you would be, maybe necessary. But like I said, I have run into the situation where, carriers are looking for a specific brand of controls. Now, I have another app that I use that has, it's a ransomware attachment, and there's a drop down and it has a list of the types of controls that obviously they're looking for nowadays. So, but the good news is I feel like overall, being, I work on all the new business and then renewals as well. So overall, I feel like there is definitely some stability in the market with more people kind of adding cyber coverage and the pool getting bigger. And then, then obviously people working with closely with their IT departments or their MSP like you, Tom, that, are adding controls and making sure they're staying on top of it. And another thing I want to point out too is how important it is to answer, the applications, check the correct boxes all the time. And how, obviously to be truthful when you're filling out an application is always important. But I was reminded of an incident, I think, where a carrier actually went to court. And I think it had to do with MFA, if I'm not mistaken. The carrier went to court to fight against someone who had a substantial claim, and they actually ended up winning that case because they were able to prove that, they said, they used MFA in all these areas, and they weren't using MFA in all those areas. So pay close attention to how you answer the question. So now this application you're showing me is pretty advanced, and I'm not familiar with what size the company or what business this company may have been in, but the application that I typically use is one page that has maybe 6 or 8 questions that have to do with security measures. And then that'll kind of give you usually an indication of a quote. and there may be some back and forth, and the client may have to actually fill out a more advanced application based upon maybe their revenues or what type of business that they're involved with. So
this was a new one. This was about a month and a half, 2 months ago. Actually, it was a month ago, and when the client sent it over, I read through it and went, "Holy crap! They're asking for a lot of stuff that I have not seen in an application before." They're asking if you've got next generation firewalls, what EDR you have, if you're doing vulnerability scanning, if you're doing penetration testing. MFA is in there. Last year, MFA was hey, do you have MFA? If not, you really should get MFA. And then this year, from what I've seen, MFA is if you don't have MFA, we're not covering you. But even then, are you doing MFA on everything?
I mean, it definitely affects the premiums for sure. And like you said, there has been denials. So I believe on the application that I usually supply, it'll ask if you have MFA in place for remote access, email access, and then also in place for a network administrator, or other privileged users. But like I said, that I have run into, like you said earlier, I have run into where MFA has ultimately kind of shut down the whole quote process because they needed to add it, and I get it. It can be a hassle, I guess.
Well, it's a are you letting somebody in or not kind of thing. I think MFA is a necessary. I'm not even going to call it a necessary evil right now.
I know. I want to say evil too, but I don't really want to say evil.
It's. I've gotten so used to it that I'm just like, whenever I log in, I approve the push because we use Duo and it just sends a push to your phone. So it's not like it takes a lot of time. I'm annoyed by MFA that comes across as a text message because I know how easy it is to port the SMS portion of your phone number to somebody else. It's like $15. That makes me nervous. But anyway, so there was some more stuff in here.
And I could share that application I have too, if you want. You want to.
Give me just a sec. I got a couple other things I want to hear. So I thought this was interesting. To the non-IT users have local administrator rights. To use a network monitoring solution. This is the first time I had seen anybody talk about a network monitoring solution in one of these applications. And the client this came from is, I don't think they're huge. They're only like 6 full-time employees. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of surprised by what I'm going. And then, do you have a security operations center? This is the first time I've seen any of these applications ask for a SOC or for network monitoring or administrative rights. And then where'd the other stuff? So additional controls. They've got questions about policies in here, which I thought were pretty wild. Application whitelisting. So like I've said, this
is definitely a very advanced application.
Yeah.
And this was actually a client of yours, Tom, that sent this?
Yes. So okay. I helped fill this out and kept it because I was like, holy crap, I've never seen anything like this before. The ones that I normally see are not quite this bad, but I did have a client recently that had remote web workplace. They had a web interface to their term server inside their office, and their cyber insurance company emailed them and said, "Shut it off, or we're going to drop you." So, and the remote web workplace was controlled with Duo, so you had to have Duo to get in. Mm-hmm. It was only HTTPS, so RDP was not open to the internet, and they said, nope, got to close it down. So we closed it down. But I thought that was interesting, is that insurance company is actually scanning the client networks.
That is very interesting. So, yeah. I mean, I know that on the policies that we sell, there's some additional services not pertaining to scanning their actual network, but having like a cyber risk report they'll run, or they'll run a and then they offer like some pre-claim assistance stuff, but not actually monitoring their networks per se. And maybe there are carriers that are doing that, and I'd be interested to know who that was at Tom that shut that down. So
I'll tell you after this. I don't want to name insurance companies. I think the biggest question I've got, because we've kind of touched on this thing's asking for everything, which is incredible. DNS filtering, perimeter firewalls.
Yeah,
I've
like I
never
said,
seen-
if I shared the application that I use, it's
Go ahead.
much
Go-
simpler. Actually, I
Go
could
ahead.
probably.
Yeah, I'm still pretty blown away that this thing is so in depth. But I mean, I'm seeing this change in the applications we're getting, where they're starting to get really in depth on it, and at some point, I'm guessing we're going to be required to have it. I know I'm required to have this stuff as an MSP.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I mean, the MSP applications are changing quarterly, pretty much.
Ridiculous.
They're adding a page every quarter, pretty much. But on the cyber piece itself, and let me see here. I can try to find this my application so I can kind of share it with you. Let's see how I can. Oh, sorry about that.
There we go.
So, there we go. All right, look at that.
Sweet.
I didn't even have to call IT guy to figure out how to do that. You trust me, I had to learn everything about computers when I started working in an office again. So this more or less has the company name and gross revenues and record counts and employees and all that obvious information. But as far as the security information, that has endpoint detection, MFA, and then
and it's asking for MFA for network administrators and privileged users, which is awesome. Not
yes.
necessarily for regular users logging into their desktops.
Exactly. So
okay.
And then and this like I said, this is just a one-page app, and most of the time I can get bindable quotes from 6 or 8 different carriers with this, and then other times I'll have to come back maybe with a little bit more advanced application or whatever, but it'll give me at least an indication, of a quote. So
how much does a no affect the coverage, the price of the coverage, if you had to guess? Or has it gotten to the point now where if you don't have MFA, you're done?
I would have a hard time putting a percentage on it, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's done. They may have to search a little harder. The underwriters may have to search a little harder to find a carrier willing to take that risk. But there's a direct correlation between controls in place and your premium. So, I mean, it's definitely, part of the business where it's going to be attached to, the actual controls. So,
and then I think the big one that I want to ask is, in case of a breach, if you've seen one, which I know a lot of people that have, but I've been lucky so far. I've had one business email compromise in 10 years, and that was the one that we caught last week. But I've got friends in the industry who talk about the breaches they've had to deal with. One of my friends owns a incident response company. So his job is the insurance company hires him, he flies out, and his team rebuilds the network. And discussing this with them, they're talking about, if you have a breach, a lot of times the network becomes off limits. They take all the equipment, they do forensics on it. Are you seeing anything like that with the carriers you work with?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously each incident is unique to itself, but, they definitely have, do forensics in the case of a breach or a cyber event, and they will, advise the client on whether or not they actually need to ship out the actual, materials for them to, to go through.
So there's a chance that if somebody has a breach and they have cyber liability insurance, there's a chance their entire network is going to be off limits, and they're going to have to put, buy new hardware and put everything back.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and then also, like, the most of the breaches that I've come in contact with were social engineering or phishing events, and they were unfortunately effective at being in someone's system for months, and I've heard years
Man,
on end,
man.
and just basically gathering information, and then ultimately ask for a wire transfer or something, rather than paying an invoice. They were educated enough to know amount of invoices, and and everything is in your computer. They knew everything pretty much, and then so most of it have run into that. And actually, kind of touching on that is, if you look at most of the time, if I get a quote back, there's areas that have been sublimited. So if it's $1 million policy and it's $1 million for breach response and ransomware and stuff like that, it'll be sublimited in like funds transfer fraud, social engineering, and then there's a third one, and I can't think of it offhand, or cyber crime. So they'll be sublimited to $250,000 typically. Sometimes it's only $100,000, and that's typically on first party coverage. So, like I said, getting back to first party is just everything that affects your company specifically, your company's data specifically. So, but it is interesting, and like I said, that's probably the biggest change that I've seen, because a few years ago it was $1 million. It was $1 million across the board.
Right.
And I'm sure you've seen that in your own policy, Tom, where it's like,
Oh yeah.
with your and cyber coverage in particular, they're sublimiting certain areas because of the claim activity. But I feel like they're, getting a better handle on, like I said earlier, controls being in place, and then, more people actually adding cyber liability coverage to their the offering. That I'm definitely seeing more reasonable renewal prices when they, when I have to have a renewal. They're definitely more reasonable price increases, or they may even stay flat. So
I know ours has gone up every year.
yeah,
One year it went up quite a bit. I don't think it went up quite a bit last year. It was pretty good. We haven't had a breach. We have everything in place. So the firewall, vulnerability scanning, MFA. I mean, I've got MFA on so much stuff that I can't log into anything without having to approve it.
yeah.
We've got a SOC, we've got MDR, we've got everything that's listed on that application I had up. Pretty much we have. We have the policies in place for it. A lot of the companies I'm working with don't yet, and some of them we're working on, and some of them have not come over to the security side yet. And it's interesting to kind of watch the earlier this year I was at a conference where the deputy director of CISA, which is the government cybersecurity agency, they mentioned that we are going to be held responsible for clients that don't buy into security, which I thought was kind of scary.
Oh yeah.
Now I've had some pushback on that since that was said. But then last week they were talking about CMMC and how if you're helping companies with their CMMC compliance, now you have to be CMMC compliant yourself. So the government is basically getting involved in this stuff because there have been a lot of failures on the part of some IT providers where the security wasn't in place. People lose money. All of a sudden, people are upset.
Yep.
And that's where I see it going. The fun part is that it's not hard. It's not difficult. It's actually not too bad when it comes to rolling the controls out. And the controls are just teaching people,
Yep.
hey, don't do this. The business email compromise we had last week was an encrypted email in 365 using the 365 encryption. Once the user opened it, there was a link to an Adobe document on Adobe's website. So they redirected to an Adobe document that was hosted by Adobe. In that document, there was a link, and it said it was SharePoint. So for a user who's not familiar with this stuff, they click on the first link and it takes you over to Adobe. So it was adobe.com, but it said SharePoint on it. And then it said, click here to preview. That link took you over to a third-party website. There was a misspelling of the name of the original email address.
Yeah.
And it was a proxy for 365. So you enter your username and password and you hit enter, and it comes up and says, what's your MFA or whatever, and you approve it or you type in your code, and they're in your mailbox. And within 10 minutes, they were sending emails to the CFO about wire transfers. It was that fast.
Yeah.
And there's no spam filter that I believe would have caught that second site. The first site was Adobe. It was legitimate. So Microsoft's like, that's cool.
Yeah.
When this happened a couple days later, we pulled the site up again, and it wouldn't let us go to the last site because it said it was a Windows Smart Screen block site. But the first day this happened, it was like, you're fine.
Yeah.
So that's
it is amazing. Seeing. I mean, I always tell clients that unfortunately there's people who get up to go to work just like you and I do, but their job is to figure out how to beat the system,
Yep.
How to hack into someone's operating system, or hack into someone's data,
Yep.
So
well, we've got about 5 minutes left, 4 minutes left. If anybody's got a question, throw it in the Q&A if you can see it. I see it.
And then also I want to talk about too, like that, how important it is to have a breach response plan in place. And I'm starting to see more carriers kind of requesting that, or, and actually some of them offer, after I've sold a policy, they may have a portal where they can go in and they kind of have a breach response plan that they can implement, for their own company. So
do you think it is beneficial for the client to have their own breach response team on?
Well, I'm on the fence with that, actually. I mean, sometimes, obviously, I feel like having any layer of protection, is always an advantage. But in the event of something happening, and the IT department or their MSP being able to at least secure what needs to be secure. Short of that, I'm like I said, I'm kind of on the fence on whether or not, and I guess, companies would have to ask themselves on a case by case basis if they're, want to have that added extra layer of protection. But I sell insurance for a living, so I always feel like everything's when people say like, well, do I need cyber insurance? And I feel bad because I'm like, unfortunately, I have to say yes, because I feel like, I'm an insurance salesperson, so yeah, I want to say yes, but it's like, I'm like, in reality, nowadays, everyone needs to have cyber insurance as far as I'm concerned. And to tell you the truth, in the few years I've been doing this, and this is just my own, small amount of data I've gathered over the few years, that I just feel like early on, maybe half the people I talked to, whether it be at a softball game for my daughter, or, or at a party or something, kind of heard the term. And now it's like, I feel like I mentioned it now, and not only have they heard the term, they have a policy, or they know someone who had a breach. Now I feel like half the people I talk, knew someone that had a breach, or knew about, knew about a customer or a client or a friend that actually maybe had a cyber incident at, in their own business. So
we just had a local company that got nailed with a business email compromise, and they lost $285,000. I've got a question. Cassie says, we have a client who requested that we show proof of a penetration test. We've never done anything like that. Is there a good starting point for us to learn what would that involve? So, yeah, you need to hire a company to do a penetration test. There are companies out there that do it. We've got clients that have used a couple of them, and that way they will show you what's going on. It's a lot of it's how everything's locked down. And it's not too bad, but this is Cassie's question reminds me of a question I had from a prospect last fall. They lost business because they didn't have a SOC, and I thought that was interesting. There are actually companies out there that are now talking to contractors, and if you don't have the security stuff in place, you're not getting the bid.
Wow!
So I thought that was interesting.
The controls are definitely not ever going to be less. They're always going to be more and more going forward. So
yeah, we're adding more and more stuff, and managing it's fun. It's when I got into IT, it was easy. You fix something, you went back and drank your coffee.
Yeah.
And now you fix something, and then you watch dashboards to make sure nothing's on fire.
Yeah.
So.
I hear the story all the time. Every MSP I started out as the break fix guy and morphed into cybersecurity.
Yep, and you have to. I mean, we have no choice. We have to be involved in cybersecurity. I I have one former client. They were sold, and the buying company took them over. They never did managed services, never did managed IT. They had a user that worked there, would click on everything, and we unencrypted them twice for a lot of money. So because they were hourly, and I never quite figured out why they wouldn't do it, but okay, whatever. So anyway, we're at the half-hour mark.
But just to reiterate, I mean, I just feel like it's, like I said, we're actually a broker, so I'll have access to many different carriers when it comes to quoting. Feel free to reach out. My email is mikeh@inskyber.com. I'm not sure if Tom's going to supply it to you guys, but
I'll put it in the video. So I'm going to post this on YouTube.
It just kind of stress how important it is to have, a broker, insurance broker that you trust, because it's not only kind of like if you have a policy in place that next year it comes up for renewal and there's a large increase or something, is that broker going to look out for your best interest and maybe take it to market and try to get you, a better price, or if coverage changes or whatever, or if you need to make changes to the policy or anything along those lines. But in addition to that, working with, an MSP that you trust, obviously, an MSP, I have calls with MSPs. That's 90% of my business probably. So having an MSP that you trust, having a broker that you trust definitely goes hand in hand when it comes to, cybersecurity and cyber insurance. So
cool. Well,
awesome.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thanks for
thanks so much
talking to me today. Thanks for everybody. Thanks everybody for coming. And if you have any questions, mikeh@Inskyber, INSKYBER.com.
Correct.
And Tom@GoWyant, GOWYANT.com. If you have any questions, I'm going to post a recording on YouTube, so you can rewatch this if you'd like, and I'll throw the email addresses in there in the title, and let us know if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Take care.
And you too. Thanks.